I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theatre scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theatre scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theatre creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you value the work that I do on Stageworthy, please consider leaving a donation either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Stageworthy is created entirely by me, and I give it to you free of charge with no advertising or other sponsored messages. Your continuing support helps me to cover the cost of producing and distributing the show. Just 4 people donating $5 a month would help me cover the cost of podcast hosting alone. Help me continue to bring you this podcast. You can find a link to donate in the show notes, which you can find in your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. Ryan Sero is a writer and actor based in the Hamilton area. He joined me to talk about his upcoming production, Best Barred Bits, on for one night only on September the 22nd at Gage Park in Hamilton. In this conversation, we talk about how Best Barred Bits is more than just a Shakespeare review, how he was once partially buried alive as part of a site-specific theater project, how Monty Python's Flying Circus may have been what first made him love Shakespeare, and much more. Here's our conversation. I'm using the browser I don't usually use. So it's like just to get everything off the screen, because I don't know about you. I have so many tabs open at any given time that I also have programs for saving things that I might want to have open later.
Yep.
So they don't have to be open now. That's how bad it is. It's a strange addiction.
I think everybody does that. I there was a bit of a fib when I said I have a few tabs open. I have many tabs open. And they are all things that it's like, I'm going to get to that.
Yes.
So
that's the problem with tabs. And of course, when if you're in the process of writing something, there's all of the tabs that are things that you're referencing for all of the things that you're working on.
Yep.
And you can't close them. What if you forget about them?
I'm using those. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in a writing session earlier today, and I was pretty good about that, actually. So I had opened a couple of tabs. I had to reference, it was like a Christmas show.
Right.
That I was doing a rewrite on a Christmas show that a friend of mine had hired me to do. And he'd originally hired me to give him some notes, and I gave him the notes, and he was like, "Do you want to do the rewrite? I'll pay you extra money." And that was the magic words.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing the rewrite and working on it this morning. And I've been working on it for a couple of weeks, but I was working on it this morning, and I had these tabs open. It's a Christmas show, and so I'm having the angel character reference Bible verses, and I was like, I mostly remember what that verse is talking about, but perhaps I should bring up the actual words and get it right, because I feel like the angel might remember that.
Yeah, no, it's bad when you think you remember something and you write it, and then somebody's like, actually, that's not what it says. And I am 100% that guy. If I get the inkling that anything like that is off, I'll be, is that actually what it is? Is that really, was that when that battle was fought? When that, just whatever it is. The one that I'm very pedantic about and that I make fun of all the time. There have been there's one theater show that I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen where 2 factors happened. 1, they used firearms. And 2, they got them right. I cannot tell you. Now, I don't think I've seen anything at like a Shaw Stratford kind of level where I feel like they probably had firearms experts come in and tell them how to do stuff.
So I can't recall seeing anything there with firearms. But I've seen several at like fringe festivals or things like that. And this is going to be a surprise to everybody, but the Venn diagram of people who know about firearms and people who make independent theater shows, that looks like goggles staring at you. There is no overlap on that Venn diagram.
It's rough. The whole when you're writing something, you're thinking like, I know enough about this, and then you're like putting it on the stage and you're like, it's fringe and we don't have any money, and then you're like, you do something, and anybody who knows anything about the topic that you're doing, like drugs, like guns, swords, things like that, there's always somebody who's like, nope.
Well, sword people are, ironically, I think the sword thing on stage is a bit of a double edge, because if you get it, if you get it right, it probably won't look good on stage.
Yes.
And so there are certain things, I've actually done a bit of, exploration on YouTube, watching these, HEMA. It stands for Historical European Martial Arts. And they do, they study like ancient medieval sword manuals and figure out how to actually fence like a knight. And when you see enough of those videos, it kind of messes with your brain the next time you see a stage combat thing, because they are not the same thing. It's like real martial arts and then stage fighting. It's not the same thing, because you're never actually trying to hit anybody. It's too slow. It doesn't work right. Or there's a flurry of moves on stage or on screen because you want to see this exciting martial arts demonstration. But that's not what it really looks like. It really looks like people kind of feeling out each other's guards and then one guy pummeling the other guy in the head.
Yeah.
It doesn't really look like anything that you actually want to watch.
That's not dramatic. And that's the difference. And my friends who are, fight choreographers, they will talk about that. Because, they've studied the actual, what it actually looks like. And then they're like, it looks like this. This is what an actual sword fight would look like. They show you, and then they're like, but that's boring.
Yeah. If you want, a lot of people make fun of the fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader in the the fourth Star Wars movie, depending on how you want to count it, in A New Hope. And they say, it's these slow old guys barely able to move. And some of that is practical because they couldn't actually smash these light bulbs together. But if you watch, I did at some point, just completely independent of anything Star Wars, I just wanted to see what a real kendo match looked like. And I looked one of those up and I watched a bunch of kendo masters fighting. It's really close to the way that duel actually goes. They almost like tap the swords together a few times. Like they're very, very much like slowly feeling the other one's defenses out before there's a couple of quick cuts, and then they'll back off again. And it looks very, very similar to what they wound up doing in the A New Hope duel. And that's one of those things where like, I can kind of watch it now and go, that looks like what real kendo masters look like. So it doesn't look slow to me anymore. But if you don't know that, it does.
Well, it's also, it's very different from what they did in subsequent films.
Yes.
So it does really stand out.
Yeah. And that's totally on the subsequent films. And again, there were physical limitations. If they could have swung them faster, they probably would have. But
first off, Alec Guinness was old and the other guy couldn't see.
Couldn't see. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things that were coming up against them, in terms of that. But of course, what makes it work is that it's the story, which is what we're getting at, which is when you use the fight choreography to tell a story and to reveal character and to have a moment on screen or on stage. That's what makes it exciting to watch. It's not actually whether or not it's good kendo or whether or not it's good fencing or whether or not it looks cool. It's all about whether or not it serves the story, which is why to me, sword fights like Wesley versus Inigo are going to be some of the best.
It tells you everything. And that's why that's such a brilliant sword fight and why they shot it last. Because I
didn't know they did.
They did. It was one of the last things they shot because they were learning it and learning how to look like they knew what they were doing for the entirety of the filming process. They would have like training in the morning or like first thing or at some point during the day, and they would go and they would run the fight. and then they would go and they'd film their other stuff. So by the time they actually got to it, they looked like swordsmen.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's really cool. I didn't know any of that. I looked up at some point what are the most accurate, not just the best sword fights, but what are the most accurate sword fights on screen. And most sword fighting guys seem to think that it's The Duelists, which is a movie from, I want to say the 70s. It's got to be the 70s by Ridley Scott. It's one of his earlier films. I think it's pre-Alien, which would de facto make it the 70s. And it's Keith Carradine, I think, and Harvey Keitel. Mm-hmm. And they fight a series of duels through a movie called Duelists, in case you were worried about that. and they apparently get the sword fighting very, very accurate to what they should be doing.
Let's jump in to talk about before we digress.
Sure.
To the point of no return, we don't end up talking about the things that we're supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
I want to talk about best bard bits, which sounds...
Me too.
Sounds like a great time. Could you describe this show to me?
Yeah. So best bard bits the concept is that you're sitting down to watch 4 people who are going to basically do a review of Shakespeare's greatest hits, if you will. And so they come out and they introduce the show and they say, we're going to do scenes from Hamlet and we're going to do scenes from Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet. And one of them, Mike, comes flying in and goes, and Cymbeline. And the other 3 go, no, shut up, Mike, shut up. We talked about this. We're not doing Cymbeline. Nobody came here to see Cymbeline. We don't even know what that is. And the show is about this guy, Mike, attempting to upstage the rest of the show and by Machiavellian subterfuge, create enough sabotage and chaos that he can sneak bits of Cymbeline into the show, and the other people responding to that. And so the other characters are, in it, I play Kilgore, who is a pompous, egomaniacal, constant leading man type. I typecast myself on that one. And then there's Jenny, who's kind of always the leading lady. And then there's Stacy, who is always like the secondary actress. And so, of course, at some point, Mike comes over to her and he's like, you ever notice how Kilgore and Jenny get to be the leads and everything? If you do Cymbeline with me.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as the average person, like really average person who doesn't know Shakespeare at all, doesn't know that Cymbeline exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
To them, probably all that exists is Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and maybe Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah, the ones that they actually want to do.
The ones that they've seen or whatever, the ones that they've heard of. And even among people who are in the theater, people who know Shakespeare, many people don't know much about Cymbeline.
Oh yeah, very little. I had to do a refresher on it when I sat down to write best bard bits. I had seen a film version with Ethan Hawke, which is very good to my recollection, but it had been long enough that I went, I gotta go back into this.
Is it because people don't know Cymbeline that you were like, this is the one that this guy's gonna want to like put in there?
So there are many plays that we could have picked. We could have picked, Two Noble Kinsmen or Merry Wives of Windsor. There's a lot of ones that people won't even know the title. Average people even people who go to the theater, even people who've seen quite a bit of Shakespeare, they might not remember that something like Cymbeline is there. Why Cymbeline happened was because when this show was being developed, I was sitting down with some people who wanted to do some theater, get some more theater stuff going in Norfolk County. And specifically, they were interested in Shakespeare. They'd heard through a mutual friend that I did this kind of thing. And so we were just sitting around at a cafe talking about possibilities. And one of us said, it'd be great to do a review, basically just doing the show without the gag angle. And I said, the thing is, I would like to do something where there is a through line. So you're not just sitting down and watching people go, and now a scene from Hamlet, and now a scene from Romeo and Juliet, and so on. And in further conversation, she said that she had been to, I feel like she'd been to England and had seen what the show that happened to be playing at the Globe when she went to see one was Cymbeline. And so we got talking about that for a little bit. And that's when it hit me like a thunderbolt out of the blue. Okay, here's the through line. And I pitched them this idea about Mike trying to sabotage things. I don't remember if I called him Mike at the time, but just said there's going to be these 4 people and one of them is going to try to sabotage it. And he'll be pushing Cymbeline because we were talking about, she was saying it was a good show. She enjoyed it, but she'd never heard of it. Nobody knows what it is. I thought that's funny. The idea that there's somebody out there who's just obsessed with this show, wants it to happen, is going to push it on everybody else. And, there's just great comedy there to be had in any kind of awkward tension like that. You can get great drama or great comedy out of it. And so that's how it started.
Right from the start, there's comedy in the fact that somebody is obsessed with Cymbeline because who is obsessed with Cymbeline of all things?
Yes. And his name is Mike and he's in this play. And I think that's it. That's the character name. The actor is Carlos Jimenez, and I kind of wrote it hoping that Carlos would take the part. That was true of all the parts. Annalee Flint plays Jenny, and Liz Buchanan plays Stacy, and these are people that I've known for a while. And when you're crafting the script, you're kind of going, this person is going to have a lot of fun with that, and I think they'll say yes. But boy, I really hope they say yes to being in this show because they're going to really make something wonderful out of it.
Right. Yeah. Now, I have to say that there have been reviews of Shakespeare.
Yep.
People do those, and it is literally like, and here's a scene from such and such, or, which I guess if you really love Shakespeare, you would go to see that. Or if you're looking for some kind of, primer on Shakespeare, like beginning entry. I don't see them. You don't see them very often. I think I've only seen them in like theater school and things like that. But giving it a through line and a comedic idea and throwing some chaos into it, that to me that sounds like a lot of fun and what elevates this beyond just a review.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to do because I do love Shakespeare, and I think that I would probably I love it enough that I think I would enjoy watching people do it as just a straight up review. That would probably be fun, assuming it was well acted. It can go very wrong very quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
But for me, a lot of it comes back weirdly enough to my obsession / interest / respect for Monty Python. And one of the reasons I think Python works where a lot of other sketch comedy shows I've seen haven't worked is that Python always had that through line. It's anarchic, but Python flows the way a conversation flows, the way that we went from sword fighting to best bard bits, the way that trains of thought go, where you're thinking about one thing and, oh, here comes another, the way that a Wikipedia rabbit trail goes, although I guarantee you that they weren't thinking about Wikipedia back when they first developed the flying circus. But
right.
But there was a logic. It was a chaotic logic, but there was a reason the way that it kind of loops around. And to me, that's what sets it apart. And there's this kind of glue with Terry Gilliam's animations and things like that. And it's something that I've thought about where every now and then I go, maybe do I want to try and like put together a group of people and do some sketch comedy? And every now and then I think, I've never actually done it yet. And one of the things that it's not necessarily holding me back, but one of the things that goes through my mind every time I think about it is, okay, but what's the thing? What's the thing that's going to stick this together? And to me, that was as soon as I was talking to these people and Joy was her name. She said, what about a Shakespeare review? The first thing that popped into my head was, okay, but what's holding it together? Because you're going to kill your momentum. If you just go from one scene to another, just introducing it and then thank you for your applause and here's the next scene, it kind of kills the momentum between the thing. But if you're waiting to see how Mike is going to disrupt this one or how angry is he going to make Kilgore now, then that creates an added level of tension that's going to hold between the scenes. And even during some of the introduction things, because you do have to throw that to the audience as well. You can't count on everybody knowing the exact circumstances in which Friends, Romans, Countrymen is delivered.
Yeah, right.
And it's a much better monologue if you realize that this monologue is delivered not just as a eulogy to Julius Caesar, but also that he is trying to win over the people to his side. And also, very important, I think, that if he fails at this, Mark Antony will be torn to pieces by an angry mob of people who hate him because Brutus and the others have created this story where, and I think some of the fun of Julius Caesar, the play, is picking which story is actually the true story. But they've at least created a narrative where Caesar was bad and his allies are bad. And so the mob are kind of out for blood. And if Antony cannot swing them with this speech, he might be dead, literally dead.
Yeah.
And you have to give that to an audience because not everybody's going to remember that or have ever known it to begin with.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Because, I think sometimes people think they know things about Shakespeare, and then that sort of falls apart as soon as you jump into a scene in the middle of the play, and then they're like, wait, who's that? Why do they care about this? What's going on?
Yes.
Why is there poison?
There's always poison. There's almost always cross-dressing. A remarkable number of times does it come up in Shakespeare that somebody goes, how am I going to get together with the love of my life?
Yes.
I know. I'm going to pretend to be dead. And then when they come to get me, in 2 plays, they use a fake poison to create a comatose state. Much Ado About Nothing and Romeo and Juliet both use it to create a romantic response in somebody. I don't know what was going on in Elizabethan England, but they had an odd notion of how love potions work.
There's also Midsummer Night's Dream, where there's all kinds of stuff being dripped into people's eyes to make them fall in love.
Yeah. One of them never gets out of it.
That's true. That's true.
Demetrius remains hypnotized at the end of that show.
That's one of the things that I think we don't deal with very often, is you have a situation where in that play, the fairies are like, what? We're going to fuck with these people. And you know what? Even Bottom gets his real head back. He doesn't get the head of a donkey forever. And all the lovers, they get adjusted so that they're back to the person that they're supposed to be in love with, except
for Demetrius.
Except for Demetrius, who's still they're still like, well, I guess, we think that you should be in love with this person. So boom, there you go.
Boy, it'd be really convenient if you were still in love with her. So
yeah.
We're going to do that. I love imagining Shakespeare writing this play and then coming to the cast that and he's assembling the parts, and they go, what have you got for us today, Will? And he goes, you're never going to believe this. I've got this great play. I call a character Bottom and I give him a donkey head. His name's Bottom, you guys. Bottom. And I think that's there's so many kind of misconceptions we have about Shakespeare. It's amazing how many people still don't realize how fun he is and how kind of stupid like that he can be. We think of him as the bard, as this poet supreme, as this incredibly high art. But if you read A Comedy of Errors, he's got range.
I think I really blame it on the Victorians for taking the fun out of Shakespeare, because they were the ones who were like, this is literature, and we're still dealing with that today, and people don't know how fun it is. Midsummer Night's Dream, I call it a gimme. There are so many chances in that show to make the audience have a great time and fall in love with the show.
Yeah.
If you fail all the way up to the end, you've still got the play within the play, and that is almost impossible to fuck up. Almost. And so you could if they were like, I don't know about this play, if you do that right, you've got a good show. So
yeah. That's actually the introductory monologue to that is one of my favorite monologues.
Yeah.
I don't remember it. I don't have it memorized. I used to. I did it for an acting group. It was called the Actors Forge, and we used to get together it was kind of like a class with no teacher. You just kind of learn from each other. And it was really cool. And so a couple of times we would do some Shakespeare stuff. And for one of them, I brought in that monologue. I can't even keep the Rube Mechanical's names straight. But the director, the director,
Peter
I want to Quince, yeah. And the way that I approached the monologue was that he was just sweating the whole time, like just couldn't, because he's standing in front of the king of Athens and his queen, Theseus and Hippolyta, by the way. They're literally mythological characters.
Yes.
Right? The queen of the Amazons and the guy that killed the Minotaur, and just like, And so he's standing up there and he's about to present their little weird play. And he can't remember what's going on. I had one of the gags that I came up with was that I was clasping my hands the whole time. And at some point I would slowly unfold them and deliberately check them for lines that I'd clearly written down on my hands because I couldn't remember them in front of Theseus and Hippolyta. And that was the way that I played. I had a wonderful time doing it that way. And if I ever did Midsummer again, I would probably want to play Peter Quince. At least, if not doubling up with something, but I'd want to play Peter Quince just so I could do that bit, because I think I really had enjoyed that and had a lot of fun.
It's such a good bit. The whole thing is such a good bit.
Yeah.
Now
there's nothing quite like competent people pretending to be incompetent for a laugh, is there?
I mean, see, that's the difference, because incompetent people pretending to be competent is tedious and terrible.
Oh yes,
but competent people
awful.
pretending to be incompetent because. The Dunning-Kruger, they don't know that they're incompetent, but the competent people playing like complete incompetency is always fun.
Although I've long said at fringe festivals that the best shows are the best shows, second best shows, the worst shows. Because there is kind of a crazy, I don't know if it's Schadenfreude or what it is, but there's something about watching somebody just gum up everything, not deliberately, where you just kind of, especially if you see it with a friend and you can go to a cafe later and be like, what was that?
Sometimes it's just too painful. Sometimes it's painful.
Sometimes it is.
Sometimes.
So the worst shows, in my opinion, are the ones where they kind of were there, but they were just very boring. Do you know what I mean? Like there wasn't really anything to latch on to.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And those ones, you kind of go, that was fine. To me, that's the worst is if you go, because it didn't leave you with anything. You have nothing to take away. Yeah.
Now we have, it's been, like I said, it's been a while since we've had the chance to talk. And I want to talk about your theater, your passion for theater, because you've done Shakespeare. You produced last time we talked, I think we were talking about Richard the Third.
And at that time, we probably would have been, because I was doing Richard III at the same time that I was putting on the first one-man show I'd ever written and or performed.
Right.
It was a wonderful experience in many ways, and I'm super glad that I stuck it out with both of them. But there were points when I was trying to memorize Richard dialogue and then immediately switch over to memorize my one-man show dialogue. And so that was, 70 minutes of me talking to myself. We had a couple pre-recorded bits, but it was a 70-minute show, and it's a one-man show, so it was mostly me. And then Richard doesn't shut up in Richard III, even in the cut, trimmed, truncated version that I'd put together. And there were points at like 1 a.m. when I was trying to jam all this stuff into my head, and I'm like, what was I thinking? What thought process went through my head going, this would be a great idea. And I had a blast, and I'm glad I stuck with it, because I love Richard. He's my favorite part in Shakespeare to play. And I loved doing the one-man show, but it was rough for a while. Anyways, I waylaid us again.
No, that's fine. Conversation. The thing about a one-person show, having done a couple.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, and tell me if you found this, you think that, especially the first time, it's going to be so easy to learn those lines because you wrote it, right?
Yeah.
How hard could it be? You wrote it, and then you get down to it, and you're like, who wrote this? Why can't I remember it? It's a different part of the brain.
Yeah. I do find my stuff easier to memorize than other people's stuff because it has a natural flow to me, but easier does not make it easy.
No.
And I'm very proud of this. I used to have what I would call fights between writer Ryan and actor Ryan, while I was getting ready for Kathir. And actor Ryan would basically come to writer Ryan and go, if you cut a bunch of this, I don't have to memorize it. And writer Ryan would invariably reply, just learn your lines.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm proud of that because I never sacrificed the quality of the show, the quality of the writing for the convenience. And so I never did actually say, I'm just going to trim this paragraph. I can't memorize it. And so to me, that was putting the work first. The writing came first, which to me, that's the bedrock of the show. If the script stinks, you can elevate scripts, but you can't save bad ones completely. Yeah. I guess unless you send them up or something like that. But you can't really do it. And so to me, that's the core. And I'm not an egomaniac. I don't think that writers are the be all end all, to borrow one of Shakespeare's coined phrases. I don't think that they're the most important, but they are the first element. It's like the first threshold you have to pass over. If you don't clear that, you're not going to, it doesn't matter how good the actors are. It doesn't matter how great the director is, the designer, they're all going to, if the designer's brilliant and your script stinks, you're going to be looking at a wonderful looking bore.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it.
Yeah. That's a fact. And that's a fact. And some people, there's people who are like, it can't be that hard to write a play. And then they do it and you're like, and then you watch it and you're like, yeah, well.
I have seen it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen it a couple of times where somebody's come in and said, I've always wanted to write. I've heard it once with a play and once with a musical.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wanted to write whichever one. And I thought it was going to be really hard. And it turns out it was a lot easier than I thought. And inevitably those scripts stunk.
Yeah.
As soon as you do the read through ended, you were like, yeah, that you thought it was easy because you did it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not. And you failed at it.
One of the best pieces of advice I got as somebody who, writes and performs my own stuff, was decide on a date where the writing stops and you are just the actor.
Yeah.
And I got that from somebody who hadn't done that, who had not turned off their actor brain during rehearsals and performances. And so they were always tweaking, even after performances. And they never actually felt like they settled into the show and really sort of like knew the show. And so they were like, just decide on a date when the writer is done and keep to that. And then the writer doesn't come back into the room until the show's over.
That is good advice. I didn't follow it with mine. And I don't 100% regret it. Partly that was, I think, because Kathir was an interesting journey though, because it started in a group called what was that one? That was the Junction. And it was designed for performer creators. And the first year that went up, at Aquarius, I was trying to write the first one-man show that I'd ever done and worked on it for a while. And then the Junction year was over and I independently emailed Luke Brown, who was running the group, and I said, would you mind working on this with me? And he said, sure. And then he offered me a slot in Aquarius's studio series to do the show while we were working on it. So it was a bit of I don't think of it as a workshop production, but it was a script that was still being finished and polished. And so I think that's why it probably wasn't a problem that I never really turned off the writer. Now I did turn it off once I hit the stage. Right. But interestingly, we turned it back on Monday morning. And we refined it based on kind of how it had felt in front of an audience.
Right.
And so we refined it for the next couple of days. And then the next weekend, for the second weekend of the run, we had an even tighter piece. And I don't know if it's a unique aspect of my psyche. I find it easy to turn on and off switches like that.
Right. Right.
I think it's one of the reasons why method acting has never really appealed to me.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm like, why don't you just turn it off?
I did.
He said condescendingly to Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, I definitely had to turn off the writer part of my brain.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I could have really been able to really do the show if I hadn't turned it off. especially also because I knew, because learning lines was not particularly easy for me for something that I wrote as a solo show. So, I knew that if I was going to tweak it and try to learn it, it was never going to happen. So I had to just turn that off like a switch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is good advice. And if I ever come back to the arena of the one-man show, I probably will try that, because that does sound like a creation method, which would be very advantageous. Certainly. Yeah.
Now, speaking of one-man shows, was there anything in particular that inspired you, that made you want to write a one-man show to do this? Was there, cause I think anybody who writes a one-man show, they often are inspired by something else. So was there something that made you want to do a one-man show, or was it just like, I haven't done this before?
I think, well, that was some of it, was kind of the challenge of that. And can I do this? Because I'd never tried. So that was certainly some of it. I think it was partly the nature of the group as well, because it was this thing that, as I said, it was structured for performer creators. And I kind of was thinking of it in those terms. A lot of the other people in the group were kind of working on one-person shows as well. And so I think that sort of nudged me in that direction. And then I didn't have a super clear idea about what I wanted to write about when I went into the group. And after a couple of sessions, it sort of emerged that this was something that I was interested in. And as it took shape, it kind of shaped itself, I suppose, partly because I was going, I'd like to try the one-man show thing, but it sort of, it didn't want to break out of that mold either. It was a one-voice operation. So if I recall correctly, it was a while ago that I wrote it.
Yeah. I want to ask you about a couple of things. I know that at one point in the past, you had yourself partially buried alive as part of a theater show. Can you tell me about?
Yeah.
First off, what was that show and why?
So the festival was called the Dark Crop Festival. I haven't checked to see if it's fired up again post-pandemic, but it ran for, I think, at least 3 or 4 years prior to the lockdowns. And it was on in Kitchener. And in the corner of Kitchener, there's a suburb. And in the corner of the suburb, there was this, I sort of describe it as almost like a hobby farm. Like they had chickens and a few goats and things like that. It wasn't acres and acres. To my knowledge, I mean, if it was, maybe it was bigger than I thought, but that seemed to be what they had. And they had an all-night theater festival. It ran from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so when you applied to this thing, the first year I couldn't do it. I was super busy. But the second year I applied to this thing, and maybe third year. And so they say, what hour would you like? Do you want like the 7 to 10, the 10 to midnight, the midnight? Well, I'm thinking to myself, I can do a 7 p.m. show anywhere. I'm going at midnight. So then you start to think, okay, what am I going to pitch them that's perfect for this site specific thing? And so they've got like a wooded area. Okay. So the concept that I came up with was a bit inspired by the Telltale Heart, and a bit inspired by stories of thieves that have had fallings out. And so the story that I came up with was that it starts with these two guys digging a hole, and they're just shooting the breeze almost. The one guy is kind of monologuing about, he calls it the woo, like just mysterious things that are kind of silly, right? And the other guy eventually is like, hey, did you hear that? What's going on? And it becomes clear that he's a little bit more nervous than his friend. And as the show goes on, they bring over the coffin. I guess it's more of a casket. It's a box that has a body in it. And it turns out that these guys were thieves. And there were 3 of them, and they had a falling out, and they killed the other guy. Now they're burying the evidence. And one of them is slowly breaking down, and he starts to hear like,
right,
coming from inside the box, and he goes off into the woods to but he starts hearing that coming from inside the box, and then he hears the dead body talking to him, and then the he goes, he's still alive in there. We got to get him out. The other guy's going, you're crazy. Let's just get him in there into the hole in the ground and bury him. And they get into a fight, and the nervous guy kills the other guy, breaks open the box. He was hearing things. It was a telltale heart situation, and it was just his nerves. And so when he's pulling the guy out, he's not alive. He is in fact dead. And then this guy runs off terrified into the woods. And so somebody had to be in that box. Now, the best part was I made them seal me into the box before the audience showed up. So the audience doesn't know there's anybody in that box.
Right.
And in fact, the guy who ran the festival afterwards, he came over to us laughing. He goes, it was so funny. He goes, I didn't know you were in there. He goes, and when they were pulling the box over, I thought, boy, they're doing a really good job of pretending like that's a heavy box. Like there's a real body in there. And so what's really kind of was cool as a performer. And so they partially buried me. So they were like throwing dirt on it at a few points. They didn't get a lot of dirt on there. I mean, it's a 20-minute show. So there's only so deep that they can bury. And half of it, they don't even have the box in the hole. So I wasn't like fully interred or anything like that. But they were throwing dirt on this box and slowly filling up the earth around it. And so when I knocked on the inside of the box, even inside the box, I could feel the energy of the audience shift. Because of the nervous guy and the other guy kind of like pontificating about random stuff, we actually got a lot of laughs, in addition to a spooky vibe. And I asked a couple of people afterwards, was it funny to you or was it spooky? And they said it was both. And I thought that's perfect. Anyways, but when the knocking happened, there was definitely an energy shift. And then when I had my first lines as this hallucinated body, like guys, this kind of thing, from the audience, I hear somebody go, what?
Right.
Because they didn't know a body was in there. And even though there was knocking coming from inside the box, that could have been one of the other guys thumping surreptitiously on the side without him noticing. But that confirmed it, that there was actually a guy in the box, and it freaked him out or thrilled him or something like that. I don't know. It was really cool. It was a really cool experience, very unique. I would tell people about it too, and they'd go, "Oh, that sounds great." And because I told people about it, you got to come to the Dark Crop Theater Festival to see me go on after midnight doing this show, and that's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Drive up to Kitchener. Most of the people that I know are from Hamilton. Drive up from Hamilton to Kitchener and come and see the show. My friend Liz, who's in Best Bar Bits, she came to see the show, and so I'd tell other people about it, and they go, that sounds great. Are you going to do it again? And I'd kind of be like, where am I going to do it again?
That's the thing.
I got to be able to dig a 4-foot hole. Do it anywhere, which was why I wanted to do it.
Absolutely. And the only way you'd be able to do it is if you could go into a theater where they had you could build a false stage.
Yeah.
That had a space to dig into and fill it with dirt.
Yeah. And you'd need a lot of dirt. I've seen people dig on stage before, and it's always done very gingerly because they only have like 1.5 feet of dirt.
Yeah.
And you inevitably hear them hitting the stage. Yeah. You'd need literal tons of dirt. It's not going to happen. And even then, there's something very different. Because of rain, we actually wound up getting pushed back from midnight. We went on closer to 2 a.m. But you're on at 2 a.m. in a wooded area. You can barely see the lights of civilization peeking through the trees. Yeah. And there's a hole in the physical earth, and you can hear those shovels shifting earth. And you can hear that dirt hitting that box and stuff. There's just a visceral level to it where it's like, it was a site-specific show. When I make a site-specific show, I'm trying to make sure that if I took it somewhere else, it would lose a lot in the translation at best.
Yeah.
And this is one of those where it's like, look, if you're not in a copse of trees at 2 a.m. with dirt, earth being shifted, it's just not the same experience.
No.
So maybe someday, but the question of where is very much a factor.
But that is always the thing about theater, right? It is this magical thing that exists in a moment, even if you go to see the same run, night after night. Except for maybe there are some big budget shows that have a tendency, because of the way that they are machines, they run pretty much the same every night. Most other shows, if you go to see that show, it's never going to be exactly the same. There will be variations. There'll be differences. And that's what makes it great. That's what makes it. It's the thing that somebody will talk about. There are people who saw that show that are still talking about that moment today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no way for them to share that experience with people who weren't there.
No, it's gone. You could, even if we had a recording, it's gone. And yeah, that is something magical. And I think that's the thing that we have to lean into as theater creators as well.
Yeah.
This is a thing and it goes away because that is one of the things that theater has that I see a lot of usually bigger budget stuff. And don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed the heck out of a lot of, really great musicals and lavish productions, but they're kind of competing with Hollywood and they can't because we've seen Iron Man fly around.
Yeah.
And okay, there's certain things like the circus arts where it's still always going to be great seeing a trapeze artist do it live. But that's the point, is that because you're seeing this thing that's happening right there in the moment, that's what's so magical about it. And theater creators need to lean into that, because otherwise we're competing with, because we talk about this, we talk about how we're competing with Netflix and other streaming services, and we're competing with YouTube podcasts, and we're competing with movies, and we're competing with all kinds of stuff. And so to me, the thing is, if you're in competition, is that what you actually want to do, I think, is stop it being a competition entirely. Well, there is no competition because if you want to see something that's live and connected directly to you, you have to come to a live performance. And so if you lean into that, you're not actually competing with Netflix anymore, because Netflix can't do that.
As theater makers, we have to lean into the experience because people will pay for experiences. People will pay $50, $60 more for the experience. Whether they're seeing, I don't know, giant projections of Van Gogh that fill a room, or a Stranger Things experience. People will pay for experiences. They pay for something that they get to experience. And we need to talk about that more as theater practitioners, as theater makers, rather than like acting as if we are in competition with a movie, because it is not. Yeah. It's, if we can give people a sense of what the experience is like, that they won't be able to, this is different. This will be different from what you would see in a movie. And in fact, if we were to record this and show it to you, it'd be completely different.
Yeah. And I have a few archivals over the years. I sort of regret not taking more of them, but those are kind of more for me, just so that I can kind of skim back over them every now and then and go, oh yeah, that was fun and that was neat. But it's not something that I really want. Like, I don't want to market them to anybody. I don't want to show them to anybody as a product, because that's not the product. That's not what it is. I think that this is true of when I sit down to write a script. It's important to know what this script is. Is it a 5-minute comedy sketch, or is it a full length theater piece? Because those are different. And it's the same thing with when you go to market it or sell it or put it on. What is this? How is this different? What am I going to do with this? And why should people come and see this is all related to all of those things. Do you like this kind of experience? Then you're going to love this show.
Yeah. I think that's the key. And I think that a lot of theaters don't do that. A lot of theaters just say, here's the name of the play and here are the people who are in it. And then somebody will ask what it's about, and they give some kind of like explanation of the deeper meanings of the story. And people, I think the average audience is just like, I just want to know if I'm going to like enjoy it. Like, can you tell me more about like what I'm going to, like, am I going to have fun? Or am I,
boy, how fast are you turned off when you say, why should I come see your show? And they go, well, this is an important work of theater that's talking about major issues in our times. And you're like, great, you're going to feed me broccoli.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but if you look at the way that Hollywood markets movies, they are actually trying to market you on an experience. They're trying to give you a sense of what this is going to feel like when you see it.
Yeah. That was the tagline for Superman.
Yeah. You'll believe a man
Christopher Reeve can fly. You'll believe a man can fly. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is the thing that Hollywood does really well, and theater doesn't really do that often. We don't sell the experiences. There was a moment when I was doing Macbeth a number of years ago, and I was one of the murderers that kills the Macduff children. Spoiler alert for people who didn't remember it from school. But we gave Lady Macduff a baby. Yeah. For that scene. And she had a young son she talks to, and the son is obviously going to get killed, and I came in and I took her baby from her, and I said, no, it's going to be okay. And I held the baby, like the baby was going to be fine. And then in this little swaddling like doll, there was a little piece of balsa wood And so just gave it a little crack. It was just the tiniest little sound in the audience, but the entire audience would shudder, and you could never get that on film.
No,
you could never get that in a movie because it's not happening in the room. But when we make somebody suspension of disbelief, that's the thing that we do in the theater, and an audience is willing to do. And then you just that little sound, and it just like has the slightest echo in the room, and the entire audience shudders and reacts vocally. And that is the experience of live theater that I think that we need to sell somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to tell people that, because it's hard to tell them, hey, you're going to feel differently when you're in this room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's somehow like the idea of like, this is an experience that you have together, not like a movie, but like, because, the other thing I tell people I had somebody ask me once, like, so why theater? Why not just film? And I said, because if there's a dramatic scene on a theater stage and somebody gets slapped, the entire audience will react. If you're watching a movie and somebody gets slapped, not a single person will flinch or react.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And because everybody's locked in together at the same time doing this thing. Well, I kind of approach my theater making in a very similar way. First, I love breaking the fourth wall. I hate that thing. I have an imaginary sledgehammer that I use to bludgeon it as often as possible. There's some shows where it works, and that's fine. But I tend to get rid of it in my writing. When I block shows on the rare occasion that I'm directing, or when I'm working in close collaboration with a director and we're developing together, I like the blocking to be, while nailed down, not so specific that I have to stand on very, very, very clear X's all the time.
Right.
I acknowledge that there are certain stage pictures that sometimes you're making, and some movements wind up organically filling the same slot over and over and over again. But I kind of like things to be a little bit potential for chaos. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, because your show will change from night to night, and you allow yourselves those brilliant, wonderful moments of change and possibility. They're moments that are so small, by the way, that I think a lot of audiences could watch it 3 nights in a row and not necessarily notice them. But the actors feel them, and what the audience will notice, whether they know it or not, is the fact that this still feels real. It still feels live. It still feels in the moment. This doesn't feel over rehearsed. This doesn't feel overly massaged. This is the thing that's live. And of course, if you break the fourth wall, all bets are off.
Yeah.
I have nothing but contempt for people who break the fourth wall, and then the audience responds to them, and then they get that deer in the headlights look. And you're going, well, you started it, pal.
Yeah. It's so true. I think that it could be fun as a performer on a stage to play games that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And that nobody would notice. It can introduce a little bit of healthy chaos into a scene. Of course, it shouldn't. I mean, it can't disrupt the scene.
Of course not. Yeah.
It can't disrupt the scene. Years ago, I did a production of Dracula, and I was playing Van Helsing. And it didn't take me long to realize that he does a lot of standing on stage and watching things. He's the exposition machine. But you don't really know much about what he's feeling. And so there was this cigarette box on stage. And so my goal was to, when nobody was looking, to be able to get a cigarette. And I never got one, but it gave me something to. There were like times you'd be on stage waiting for somebody to come on, and you're like, I need to be doing something here.
Yeah.
And it's just a little thing that was like, it kept the scene alive, and it kept me alive in a scene where I was waiting for somebody or watching for something, and it just kept things slightly interesting.
There was a production of Dr. Faustus that I did years ago, and my friend Sean Emberley, who you would have seen because he was Freud and anybody else.
Yeah.
So he was playing Faustus, and we were doing the 7 Deadly Sins scene, sorry, and it wasn't really working for me. It was kind of felt a little flat until at some point, Sean started responding the way that a little kid does when he's being shown new toys. Clapping with delight and being horrified. And almost like an audience. He was almost like a one-man audience at a pantomime.
Yeah.
And as the 7 deadly sins were trotted out, he was, booing them and into them and clapping for them and laughing and all this kind of stuff. And the scene popped suddenly alive to me. And there was something wonderful about that. And you kind of reminded me of it because he found a way as an observer. Right. Faustus is just sitting there observing. Okay, he has a couple of exchanges with the 7 deadly sins, but mostly they're getting trotted out and delivering their 7 deadly sin monologues. And Faustus is mostly just sitting there observing, but he had turned that observation into action.
Yes.
By making and allowing, I think, the audience, or certainly me, because I was Mephistopheles watching him watch the 7 deadly sins. He had made the scene come alive by finding a way to be interactive, even though, and in an organic way, in a way, as you say, that was not disruptive to the scene. It was perfect. It fitted it in. I thought that was wonderful. I've kind of taken that lesson into my guts and think about it every now and then.
Being the character whose job is just to listen in a scene can be really difficult. I mean, if you look at, say, for example, As You Like It, the character Celia does a lot of listening or watching other people.
Yeah.
But it still has to find a way to be present and active on the scene. And it can be so difficult because there's other people doing things and she's just watching.
Yeah.
And
you got to create
really
that character.
Tough. Exactly. It's tough. It's so hard to do. And I've seen good ones and I've seen bad ones.
Yeah. And you've got to do something that's interesting, but not so interesting that you're going to pull focus.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah. That is tough. It's been a while since I've been one of the listening characters. I discovered this, or sort of remembered it, because in indie theater, you do everything. You're your own. Yeah. If you do, because you don't have money to do anything. So you don't have money to hire a costume wrangler. So everybody's just responsible for their own gear. And at one point I was doing a couple of walk-on parts in Theater Aquarius's Sound of Music. And at the end of the night, the first night, everybody else had made it home somehow, or at least left the theater. And I was still there because I'd put away all my stuff. And this tiny little woman who I'd never seen before came over, and she was like, "Did you hang up your costumes?" And I was like, "Yes," thinking I am a responsible grown adult male and I can do that myself. Yes. And she was like, I do that. I was like, oh, right. This is like a real people show.
This is like a professional show where they have a person who washes the clothes after they're done.
And I was still I left them at their various stage because I was worried about her mental checklist, and I didn't want her running around backstage looking for things that weren't there.
Right.
But I was always very respectful, and I did fold it all up and left it in neat little piles at the very least for her.
That's good. It's always weird when you're if you're doing like indie theater and everybody's doing everything else and you're like, all right, so after this show we're gonna spray all of the shirts with some water and vodka just to make sure that they're fresh tomorrow because we can't afford to do laundry. And then you see like a big budget show and everybody finishes their first costume, throws it on the floor, and somebody comes around, takes it immediately to the laundry where it is washed, dried, and pressed so that it's ready for the next show. And you're like, these are two different worlds entirely.
Yeah. And I have fun in both worlds. Yes. I don't look down on the big thing for being, too overblown, and I don't look down on the indie thing for being chintzy. I think that they're both really fun. I think actually, I think I have more fun in the indie world in this kind of odd chaos that happens. Yeah. That, I mean, there's something about that chaos. There's something about the scramble to make sure that everything gets done.
Yeah. That you can kind of get a little addicted to, and I can imagine missing it in the bigger budget stuff.
Yeah, there was a giant crossword puzzle backstage that we all kind of worked on. I would kind of wander the halls, do the crossword, read a book. Oh, that was my cue. Oh, I better get backstage. And okay, there we go. Now I'm on stage. And Sound of Music in particular, because, I was a a party guest and a priest and a Nazi and in different scenes. And so I only had these like little walk-on roles, one line tops kind of thing, but I had a blast doing it. I had a lot of fun doing it. There was a lot of really great people that worked on that show, and I had a lot of fun talking to them and hanging out with them backstage. It was very relaxing and nice because, when I write shows, I tend to do that. I've done the writer performer thing for so long that I don't know, maybe I have trust issues or something like that, but I'm always one of the prominent characters on stage because I'm like, I know how I want this done. I know how I want the role done. So I'm just going to do it. And I know that this show is important to me. So even though I can't afford to pay people for rehearsals, I'll definitely show up for all of them, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do that. And so then when I get into something where somebody else is taking care of that stuff, whether it's a really big budget production or just something where I'm just not the writer, director, producer, actor, whatever, multi-hat guy, then it's very nice. It's very relaxing. It's like, oh, right. all I have to do is memorize my lines and blocking and then show up and do them. Yeah. Wow. That's cool. I like that. My prop is laid out on a table for me in a little sectioned off square with tape. This is great. I don't have to remember to bring it from home.
No, absolutely. Is there just getting back to Best Bard Bits? When can people see that?
So people can see that on the 22nd of September. So I guess in a few days when this comes out, in about a week, I think, by the time this comes out.
Yeah.
It'll be on the 22nd of September. It's playing in Hamilton. I have been we're looking into doing it in a park. And by the time that this goes to air, we will have solidified it, of course. But we're still looking at a couple of different park areas at this point.
Is there a website that people will be able to go to find the details?
There will be a Facebook page once I've got the details. They're being solidified kind of as we speak. And
I will put it in the
I will
notes.
send, believe me, I'll remember to send all this stuff to you. So everybody will have it in.
Awesome.
So there will be a Facebook page, which is what I do.
Nice.
Makearttheater.weebly, I think, is the Make Art Theater website in general. Although we don't have anything on Best Bard Bits on there just yet, but we'll update that soon too. Nice. By the time you hear this, dear listeners, you will be able to find all the information you need for Best Bard Bits.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice talking to you, too.
Absolutely. It's good talking to you.
It's really great.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.